Don't touch her horns. But I didn't know that Jake was just a simple human from Earth. He never wanted to be a hero. He never wanted to be part of something big. All he wanted was to visit the famous Galactic station Zeta-9, try some alien food, take a few photos, and go back home. He didn't know that one small mistake would change his life forever. The space station was full of noise, lights, and strange smells. Aliens of all shapes and sizes walked around, speaking in languages Jake didn't understand. Shops sold glowing fruits, floating shoes, and even tiny robots that danced. Jake was hungry. He looked around for something that looked like food. "Excuse me," he said, trying to pass through a crowded walkway. He bumped into someone tall, soft-skinned, and glowing. "Oh, I'm sorry," Jake said quickly, turning around. It was a beautiful alien woman, tall, elegant, with purple-blue skin and silver hair. Two shining horns curled from her head like crystal branches. Her golden eyes stared at Jake in shock. Jake had accidentally touched one of her horns. Just lightly, just a small brush with his fingers. But the whole station went quiet. Aliens stopped walking. Music turned off. Even the little robots stopped dancing. Jake looked around, confused. But did I do something wrong? The woman looked pale. Her lips trembled. Her hands shook. "You touched my horn," she whispered. "Yeah, but it was an accident," Jake said. "I didn't mean to." A group of alien guards in silver armor appeared out of nowhere. "Is this the human?" one asked. "Yes," the woman said softly. "He touched my horn." "Come with us," the guard said. "Wait, what? Why?" Jake asked, but they were already pulling him away. They brought him into a large room with golden walls and floating chairs. The woman was there too, standing in front of a glowing circle. An elder alien with long white horns and a deep voice entered the room. "I am Elder Vonkar," he said. "Human, do you understand what you have done?" "I don't. I swear," Jake said. "I just touched her horn by accident." Elder Vonkar nodded. "And that, by ancient galactic law, is a binding act." "Binding?" Jake asked. "Yes," Vonkar said. "To touch the horn of a Veliari woman in public is to ask for her hand in marriage." Jake's mouth dropped open. "Marriage?" He shouted. "No. No, no, no. I didn't know." "Ignorance of law is not an excuse," the elder said. "But I'm human. I don't know your laws," Jake cried. The woman looked at him. Her voice was calm but sad. "My name is Zyrella," she said. "I am princess of the Veliari people." "Oh no," Jake whispered. "You're a princess." Zyrella nodded. "And now, you are my husband." Jake felt dizzy. This has to be a joke. Please tell me this is a joke. Elder Vonkar raised his hand. "If the human refuses the union, it may be seen as an insult, and such insult could lead to war." Jake sat down, heart racing. "So I'm either married, or I start a war." "Those are the choices," the elder said. Jake looked at Zyrella. She didn't look angry. She looked trapped, just like him. "What do we do now?" he asked her. "We go to my homeworld," she said softly, "as husband and wife." That night, Jake sat alone in the guest room the aliens gave him. Outside the window, space stretched forever, stars blinking in the dark sky. He held his head in his hands. "I came here for alien food," he whispered. "And now I'm married to a glowing princess because I touched a horn." He didn't know this was only the beginning. Someone outside the room whispered into a communicator. "The human has no idea." "Good. We move to phase 2 tomorrow." "Wait. What do you mean married?" Jake sat in silence as the spaceship flew toward Zyrella's homeworld. The stars outside the window looked peaceful, but inside his head, everything was chaos. He still couldn't believe it. Married. He didn't even have a girlfriend back on Earth. And now he was the husband of an alien princess because he touched her horn by accident. How was that fair? The door to his room opened with a soft hiss. Zarella stepped in, dressed in a royal silver robe that shimmered as she walked. Her horns glowed faintly in the dim light. "You should eat something," she said, placing a tray of steaming food in front of him. Jake looked at the plate. The food looked like purple noodles with glowing sauce. "Is that safe for humans?" Zarella gave a tiny smile. "Yes. We checked. It won't kill you." Jake picked up a fork and poked the noodles. "Great. That's all a man wants in a meal. No poison." He took a bite. It was sweet and spicy at the same time. Weird, but not bad. Zarella sat across from him, quiet. "So," Jake finally said, chewing slowly, "are you okay with this? With marrying a human who touched my horn by accident?" She asked. "Yeah." Zarella looked at him with calm eyes. "I follow the law. It protects our people. But no, Jake, I am not happy about it." Jake swallowed. "Me neither." They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Jake asked, "Is touching your horn really that serious?" Zarella nodded. "For my people, horns are sacred. Only mates are allowed to touch them. It is a symbol of deep connection, love, trust." "Well, nobody told me that," Jake muttered. "I thought it was like touching someone's shoulder." "I know," she said, "but the galaxy does not care what you thought. It cares what the law says." "That's insane," Jake said. "On Earth, we have laws too, but if someone bumps into you, you don't marry them." Zarella looked away. "Your world is young. Ours has carried these rules for thousands of years." Jake sighed. "And now we're married, because of an accident." Zarella nodded. He looked at her. "Do you hate me?" "No," she said softly. "You are not cruel, just unlucky." The royal planet, Veliar. As their ship entered the orbit of Veliar, Jake stared out the window, stunned. The planet was glowing. Cities floated in the sky, connected by light bridges. Huge waterfalls spilled from mountain peaks into the air and vanished into clouds below. Strange birds with silver wings flew in beautiful patterns. "This place looks like a dream," Jake whispered. "It is home," Zarella said, her voice flat. "And now it is your home too." When they landed, hundreds of alien citizens had gathered at the royal spaceport. They held glowing flowers and threw petals in the air. "They're cheering for us," Jake asked. Zarella nodded. "For their new prince." Jake swallowed hard. He was taken through shining halls, greeted by guards and nobles. Everyone bowed to him, even though their eyes were filled with confusion or dislike. In the royal chamber, a tall alien man with a crown of crystal waited. "Father," Zarella said quietly. "King Vardros." He stared at Jake with cold golden eyes. His horns were longer than anyone else's, glowing with power. "So, this is the human," he said. Jake stepped forward, nervous. "Hi, I'm Jake. Sorry about the horn thing." The king didn't smile. "You touched my daughter," he said. "Do you know what that means?" "I'm starting to understand," Jake replied. "You are now bound by the marriage law," the king said. "You are husband to the heir of Veliar." "Great," Jake said weakly. The king stepped closer. "Then you must prove yourself." "Prove?" Jake asked. "How?" "Tomorrow, you will take the oath of fire," the king said, "to show your loyalty and courage." Jake blinked. "Fire? I didn't sign up for fire." "You touched the horn. You accepted the bond," the king said coldly. "You are either brave or burned." Zarella turned to her father. "Father, he's not ready." "Then he will die," the king said, and walked away. That night, Jake sat on the balcony, looking up at the twin moons. Zarella joined him, wearing a simple dress. Her royal mask was gone. "Sorry about my dad," she said. "He's terrifying," Jake whispered. Zarella laughed softly. Yes, he is. Why is he so angry? Jake asked. He never liked humans. Zarella said. He thinks your kind is wild. He's not wrong, Jake said. But still, I didn't mean to cause all this. Zarella looked at him. Jake, there is something else. What? Our marriage was not an accident, she said quietly. Jake froze. What do you mean? My father placed me on that station on purpose. He knew humans didn't know our laws. He hoped one would touch my horn. Jake stared at her. So, this was a trap. Zarella nodded. You are part of his plan. But I don't know why. Jake stood up. So I was tricked into marrying you. Yes, Zarella said sadly. But I didn't know either. I only learned the truth after we left the station. Jake felt like the ground under him disappeared. This just keeps getting worse, he muttered. There is more, Zarella said. Jake turned. Seriously? Yes, she whispered. Someone tried to poison your food earlier. I stopped them. Jake's eyes widened. Someone wants you dead before the oath of fire, she said. I don't know who. But it's not just about the marriage anymore. Something bigger is happening. Jake sat down again, heart pounding. I came here for food, he whispered, and now people want to kill me. Zarella looked at him with gentle eyes. I will protect you. He looked back at her. Why? He asked. You didn't choose this either. Zarella took a deep breath. Maybe this mistake can become something more, she said. They sat in silence as the twin moons rose high in the sky, and the wind of Velyar whispered secrets through the stars. Married life. On an alien planet. The palace of Velyar was beautiful, but it didn't feel like home to Jake. He had his own royal room, his own servants, his own fancy clothes, but he didn't feel like a prince. He felt like a prisoner in golden chains. Everywhere he walked, alien eyes followed him. Whispers floated through the marble halls. That's the human. He doesn't belong here. He just touched a horn. That's not love. Jake tried to ignore it, but deep down, the words hurt. Zarella was quiet around him. They ate dinner together in silence. Sometimes she tried to ask about Earth. Sometimes she just stared at her food. One night, Jake sat in his room, staring at his reflection in the glowing mirror. He wore royal clothes now, dark silver robes with strange symbols. But he didn't look like himself anymore. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. It was Navi, a young alien girl with short horns and wild eyes. She was a royal helper, but also a bit of a troublemaker. You look like someone just told you you're married, she teased. Funny, Jake said. Because someone did. Navi laughed and walked in without asking. You're lucky, you know. Zarella is kind, powerful, smart. Most guys would kill to be in your place. Someone is trying to kill me, Jake said. Remember the poison? Navi nodded. True. Good point. Jake looked at her. Can I ask you something? Shoot. Do you think Zarella really wants this? Navi's smile faded. No, but she doesn't hate you. That's a start. Royal training begins. The next morning, Jake was woken up by loud drums and flashing lights. What is happening? He groaned. A voice shouted, Your training begins today, Prince Jake. Before he could protest, 2 guards pulled him out of bed, dressed him in warrior clothes, and dragged him to the training arena. Hundreds of aliens watched from the stands. Zarella stood at the edge, her arms crossed. Don't embarrass me, she said with a small smile. Jake gulped. His trainer was a giant alien named Gror, who had 3 arms and a voice like thunder. You are weak, Gror said, but you have legs. And arms. And fear. Fear is a tool. Use it. Jake trained every day. Sword practice, alien combat, mental games, and speeches in front of alien nobles. He fell. A lot. He got bruises, cuts, and once fainted in the heat. But he got back up. Even Zarella noticed. "You don't give up," she said one evening as they sat under the moonlight. "I can't," Jake said. "If I stop, I die. Right?" Zarella didn't answer. Instead, she offered him a piece of fruit. He took it. They sat in silence, but it was a comfortable silence this time. A moment of truth. A week later, Jake was invited to speak in front of the Council of Nobles. He wore his royal clothes and stood beside Zarella. "He's not ready," one noble hissed. "He's a child," another said. Jake stepped forward, his hands shaking. "I am Jake of Earth," he said. "I never asked to be here. I never wanted this, but I won't walk away. I respect your laws. I respect your people. And I respect Zarella." Zarella looked at him, surprised. "If you give me a chance, I'll earn your respect too." The room was silent for a long time. Then a single noble clapped. Then another. Then the whole room stood. The king did not clap, but he watched, quietly. A walk in the garden. That night, Jake and Zarella walked through the glowing garden behind the palace. Flowers floated in the air, glowing like soft stars. Small creatures sang gentle songs in the trees. Zarella stopped walking. "You've changed," she said. "Into a prince?" Jake asked. "Into someone brave," she said. They sat near a pond. The water shimmered like liquid glass. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said. "Yes." "Did you ever love someone before this?" Zarella looked at the stars. "Once, a long time ago. But he died in a war." "I'm sorry." "Me too," she said softly. "I closed my heart after that. I told myself I would never love again. But now," she looked at Jake, her eyes gentle. "I don't know, but you make me feel safe." Jake smiled a little. "You make me feel like I'm not alone." Their hands brushed. For a moment, they didn't pull away. Shadows in the palace. But peace didn't last long. That same night, a shadow moved through the palace halls. A masked figure entered the royal weapon room. He placed something small and dark on the blade Jake had been training with. "Poison." The figure whispered, "The human won't survive tomorrow. They want me dead, but she saved me." Jake was starting to feel different. He had come to Velyar by accident. A mistake. A touch of a horn. But now, something inside him had changed. He trained every day. He spoke with alien nobles. He tried strange foods, learned new customs, and even began to laugh again. But danger had not forgotten him. It was hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. The sword practice. The sun rose slowly over the glowing sky of Velyar. In the palace courtyard, Jake stood ready with his sword. It wasn't a normal sword. It was made of blue crystal, humming softly in his hands. Gror, his alien trainer, grunted. "Defend yourself, Prince." Jake took a breath and nodded. Gror charged at him. The two moved quickly, swords clashing, feet shifting, air buzzing with energy. Jake blocked, dodged, swung back. He was getting better. But then, he felt something sharp on his hand. A cut. His sword had sliced his palm. But it shouldn't have. "Ow," he muttered, dropping the blade. Gror stopped. "You are bleeding." "I noticed," Jake said, holding his hand. A healer was called. She looked at the wound and frowned. "This blade is poisoned," she said. Jake froze. "What?" "Someone touched your sword," she said. "It was not like this yesterday." Gror growled. "This is an assassination attempt." Zarella appeared out of nowhere, her eyes wide with fear. "Is he hurt?" "He will live," the healer said. "The poison was weak, but another cut could have killed him." Zarella looked at Jake. Her hands were shaking. "This is the second time," she whispered. "Second?" Jake asked. Zarella turned to the healer. "Leave us." When they were alone, she took Jake's hand and looked at the wound. "Someone poisoned your food last week," she said quietly. "I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to scare you." Jake sat down. "So, someone's trying to kill me. Again." Zarella nodded. "Do you think it's your father?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But it has to be someone inside the palace. Secrets behind royal walls." That evening, Jake and Zarella sneaked into the old library beneath the palace. Dusty scrolls lined the walls. Glowing books floated in midair. It smelled like fire, ink, and secrets. "What are we looking for?" Jake whispered. "Answers," Zarella replied. "The law that trapped us in marriage. It's old. Maybe too old." They found an ancient scroll marked with a horn symbol. Zarella read it out loud. "When a horn is touched by one of another world, the two shall be joined, unless the touch is done by force. Then the law is broken." Jake blinked. "Wait, so if it was an accident, it doesn't count?" "No," Zarella said. "If it was not romantic, not chosen, the law can be challenged." Jake stood up. "So we don't have to be married?" Zarella looked at him. "Maybe." The air went quiet between them. "Is that what you want?" she asked. Jake hesitated. At first, yes, he had wanted out. But now, he didn't know anymore. A night under danger. Later that night, Jake lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He thought about Earth, about his old job, his cat, the pizza shop down the street, all so far away now. He also thought about Zarella, the way she stood beside him, the way she touched his hand when no one was looking, the way she risked her own name to protect him. The door creaked. Jake sat up. A masked figure slipped into the room, silent, fast. Jake reached for his sword, too far. The assassin pulled a long dagger from his cloak. But just before he struck, Zarella crashed through the window. With a scream, she tackled the assassin to the ground. The two fought hard, kicks, flips, blades flashing. The assassin slashed at her arm, drawing blood. "No," Jake shouted, rushing forward. He grabbed a candle holder and hit the attacker in the back. The assassin fell, dazed. Guards stormed in and arrested the figure. Zarella was shaking. "You're hurt," Jake said, holding her. "Just a cut," she whispered. "I'm okay." "You saved me," Jake said, looking into her eyes. "I couldn't let them take you," she said. "Not now." Jake paused. "Not now." Zarella looked down. "Because I think I'm falling for you." The unmasking. The guards unmasked the assassin. Zarella gasped. It was Commander Threx, one of her father's royal guard captains. "Why?" she demanded. Threx glared at Jake. "He is a human. Weak. A stain on your bloodline. We follow the old ways. We protect the purity of the crown." "You tried to kill my husband," Zarella said. "He's not your husband. He's a mistake." Zarella raised her hand, and a blast of energy knocked Threx to the floor. "Take him away," she said coldly. As the guards dragged him off, Jake asked, "Do you think your father was behind this?" Zarella looked at him, then looked away. "I don't know," she whispered, "but Threx was his most loyal guard. A new bond." The next morning, Zarella stood on the palace balcony, her arm bandaged. Jake joined her. "You didn't have to jump through a window for me," he said. Zarella smiled. "You're my husband, remember?" He nodded. "But if we challenge the law, we might not be." "Do you want to challenge it?" she asked softly. Jake looked at her, really looked at her. Her strength, her courage, her kindness, her eyes that held pain and fire. "No," he said finally. "I want to stay. Not because of the law, because of you." Zarella took his hand. "Then let's stop hiding," she said. "If we're going to be a real couple, let's be real." "Real," Jake said, "even if your dad hates it." Zarella laughed. "Especially if he hates it." They both laughed under the rising twin suns. But in the deepest tower of the palace, the king stood alone, watching. And he whispered, "So the boy wants to stay. Let's see how long he survives." We run from the palace. The sun had barely risen over Velyar when the secret plan began. Jake stood in the shadow of the palace garden, dressed in travel armor, not royal robes. Zarella stood beside him, her silver cloak pulled low over her face. "Are you sure about this?" Jake whispered. Zarella nodded. "If we stay here, they'll try again. My father will never stop. And now that Threx has failed, he'll use someone worse." Jake tightened the straps on his boots. "Then let's go." The plan. They had been planning this escape for 2 nights. Navi, the rebel-minded palace girl, helped them. She stole maps, hacked doors, and disabled cameras. "This passage leads under the palace," she explained. "Old tunnels from the war. Nobody uses them now, except rats and ghosts." "Great," Jake muttered. "I love rats and ghosts." Navi smiled. "Better than assassins." "Fair point," he replied. Zarella kissed Navi's forehead. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Navi said. "Just survive." The underground escape. The tunnels were cold, dark, and smelled like whetstone. Jake held a glowing orb to light the path. Zarella walked ahead, her long hair tied back. She moved like a shadow, silent and focused. "So," Jake whispered, trying to lighten the mood, "this is our first trip together as a couple." Zarella gave a small laugh. "Romantic, isn't it?" "Super romantic," Jake said. "Just missing a campfire and roasted marshmallows." "What's a marshmallow?" "Squishy sugar food. I'll make you some when this is over." "Then I will fight for my life," she said, smiling softly. They walked for hours through winding stone paths. Strange carvings lined the walls, old war stories, forgotten faces, broken promises. "My people used to hide down here during the Horn Wars," Zarella explained, "before peace came." "You mean the same peace your father is ready to break?" Jake asked. Zarella sighed. "He thinks peace makes us soft. He wants power, not peace." "And what do you want?" Jake asked. Zarella stopped walking, turned to face him. "I want something real," she said. "Something worth fighting for." Jake didn't say anything. He just reached out and took her hand. They kept walking, fingers intertwined. The safe house. They reached the end of the tunnel by nightfall. A hidden doorway led to an old structure outside the royal city, built into the side of a cliff, covered by vines and moss. Inside, it was quiet, warm. A small fireplace still worked, and there were old supplies. "We'll stay here for the night," Zarella said. Jake dropped his bag. "No royal guards, no poison, no secret plans. I could get used to this." Zarella sat on a dusty couch and smiled. "Me too." They shared a simple meal. Dried fruit, warm broth, and glowing bread. "Tastes better than it looks," Jake said. "Don't get too comfortable," she warned. "We're not safe yet." But Jake could see she was tired. Her body was strong, but her soul was worn. He placed a blanket over her shoulders. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You're not just some human anymore." "What am I?" "You're my person." Those words sat heavy in his heart, in the best way. A vision in the night. While Zarella slept, Jake stood by the window. He looked up at the twin moons, thinking, how did he get here? He was a nobody back on Earth, an average guy with an average life. Now he was married to a royal alien, hunted by kings, and running through glowing forests and old tunnels. And somehow, he didn't want to go back. Suddenly, the fire flickered strangely. The room grew cold. A shape appeared, faint, glowing. Jake turned quickly. "Who's there?" It was not a person, but a vision. A shimmering figure with horns and kind eyes. "Jake of Earth," the voice said, gentle and deep. "You walk a path not meant for your feet." "What are you?" Jake asked. "I am memory," the figure replied. A guardian of the old law. What do you want? To warn you. The vision stepped closer. Zarella's father made the horn law as a trap. But long ago, the law had another meaning. It was meant to bind only those with true hearts. Not lies. Not tricks. Then it shouldn't have worked on me, Jake said. I didn't mean it. And yet, your heart chose her. Jake blinked. What do you mean? Your bond with her is no longer law. It is love. Real. Strong. Dangerous. Dangerous, Jake asked. Because love can destroy kings. With that, the vision faded, and the fire returned to normal. Zarella stirred. Jake? He rushed to her side. I'm here. Bad dream, she whispered. Me too, Jake said. But we're okay. Ambush at dawn. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, they heard footsteps outside. Someone's coming, Zarella said, grabbing her sword. They peeked through a crack in the door. Royal guards. Lots of them. How did they find us? Jake whispered. Zarella's face hardened. My father never guesses. He knows. What do? We fight, she said. Together. She looked at him. Always. They burst out the door and ran toward the forest, dodging blasts and arrows. Zarella spun through the trees, using light magic to blind their attackers. Jake used tricks he learned in training. Traps, kicks, throwing rocks. They fought side by side, back to back, breath to breath. They'd reached a cliff. No path ahead, only air and stars. We're trapped, Jake said. Zarella looked at him, then down at the waterfall below. Hold on, she said. To what? Me. Before Jake could argue, she jumped, pulling him with her. They fell. Wind howled. Water screamed. And then, silence. The river. They washed up on a riverbank, soaked and alive. Jake coughed, coughing water. Zarella pulled him up, laughing. You're not bad at falling. You either, he said, breathing hard. They sat in the mud, dripping and tired. Now what? Jake asked. Zarella looked ahead. Now we find the people who still believe in peace, she said. Rebels, old friends, voices my father tried to silence. Jake nodded. I'll go with you, even if it gets worse. Especially then. Zarella leaned closer. This was supposed to be a mistake, she whispered. I know, he replied. But it feels like fate. He kissed her, this time, not by accident. And somewhere far above them, on a throne of glass and gold, a king shattered a wine glass in his hand and whispered, Let the war begin. Captured and judged. They had run for days, through glowing forests, across crystal bridges, over cold rivers and dusty roads. Jake and Zarella had no rest, no home, no safety. But still, they had each other. And for a while, that was enough. But peace never lasts when a crown is chasing you. The rebel camp. They found shelter in a hidden rebel camp, deep inside the bones of a long-dead starship. The ship had crashed hundreds of years ago, now half swallowed by vines and roots. Inside, outcasts and freedom fighters lived, people who no longer believed in King Vardro's rule. Zarella walked among them like a ghost from the past. You were once the hope of our people, a rebel woman whispered to her. Zarella lowered her head. I still am. But not everyone trusted her, or Jake. You brought a human, one rebel spat. A soft one. A cursed one. He is my husband, Zarella said. Your father will burn us alive because of him, the rebel growled. Zarella didn't blink. Then let him try. Betrayal in the dark. They stayed for 3 nights. On the 4th, just before sunrise, the camp was ambushed. Ships screamed through the sky. Red lights. Metal boots. Shouting voices. No, Zarella yelled, grabbing her blade. Jake tried to run, but a net of energy slammed into his chest. He fell, gasping, his body frozen by the stun field. Guards surrounded them, Not just any guards, royal enforcers. A tall figure stepped through the smoke. King Vardros himself. His armor shimmered black and silver, and his horns glowed with cold rage. He looked at Zarella, then at Jake. "You ran," he said softly, "like thieves, like cowards." Zarella stood tall. "You tried to kill him." "I tried to protect my people," Vardros said, "from weakness." He turned to the guards. "Take them." The judgment hall. The palace was different now. Cold, silent, filled with stares and whispers. Jake and Zarella were dragged into the Hall of Judgment, a huge round room with a high glass ceiling. Nobles, warriors, and citizens packed the rows, watching, whispering, judging. The king stood on his throne, tall and cold. A loud voice rang out. "Today we judge Jake of Earth and Princess Zarella of Velyar for betrayal, flight, and violation of royal duty." Jake stood straight, though his legs trembled. Zarella held his hand. "Let them speak," someone shouted. "They must explain." The king raised his hand. "Then speak." The choice. Zarella stepped forward first. She did not wear royal robes. Her face was tired, her hair wild, but she spoke with fire. "I did not run because of shame," she said. "I ran because of love." The room gasped. "Love?" One noble sneered. "With him?" "Yes," Zarella said. "At first, Jake was a mistake, a stranger, a problem. But now, he is my choice." She turned to her father. "You taught me to lead, to be strong. And I say now, strength is not in silence or swords. It is in truth. And Jake is my truth." Jake felt tears rising. But he stepped forward next. "I came here by accident," he said. "I touched a horn. I broke a law. I didn't understand your world." He looked at the crowd. "But I learned. I fought. I bled. I fell in love." He looked at Zarella. "Not because of rules, not because of law, but because of who she is." The room fell silent, until the king raised his voice. "Enough." He stood from his throne. "Jake of Earth, you say your love is real. Then prove it." Jake blinked. "How?" "You will face the trial of fire," the king said. "A test of the mind, the heart, and the soul." Zarella stepped forward. "He has done enough." "Silence," the king roared. "If he is worthy, he will survive. If not, he dies." Jake looked at Zarella. "Don't," she whispered. "He wants to break you." "Maybe," Jake said softly, "but I won't run again." Zarella tried to hold him, but the guards pulled him away. The trial of fire. The chamber was made of glowing red stone. Heat filled the air. 3 doors stood before Jake. No guards, no teachers, no help. Just a voice. Choose. The door of truth, the door of fear, or the door of loss. Jake's heart pounded. "Truth," he whispered, and walked through the first door. Inside, he saw Earth. His home. His cat. His old life. His mother, sitting on the couch, smiling. "You can still come back," she said. "You don't belong there. This is where you're safe." Jake's eyes filled with tears. "Is this real?" he asked. But the vision didn't answer. He stepped back. "No," he said. "I belong where Zarella is." The door vanished. The second door opened. Fear. He stepped inside and saw Zarella, tied in chains, crying. "You let me die," she said. "No," Jake whispered. "You left me." "I didn't." Flames rose around her. Jake ran forward, through the fire, screaming her name. But she disappeared. Just a voice remained. "You carry fear, but still you move. You may pass." The last door opened. Loss. This room was cold, empty. In the center stood a mirror. Jake looked in and saw himself, alone. No Zarella, no light, no purpose. This is your future if you fail, the mirror said. Then I won't fail, Jake whispered. He closed his eyes and punched the mirror. It shattered. Light exploded. The return. Jake stumbled out of the trial chamber, shaking, burned, and bleeding. The judgment hall was full. The king stood, surprised. Zarella ran to him, holding him tight. You did it, she whispered, crying. You did it. The elder stepped forward. By ancient law, the trial proves the strength of his love and soul. Jake of Earth is now one of us. Cheers rose. Not from all, but from enough. Zarella helped Jake stand. He looked at her. Did I win? No, she said. We won. In the shadows, the king turned and left the room without a word, his face unreadable. But in his hand was a small piece of shattered mirror. He looked down at it and whispered, Then so be it. The war begins now. The trial of fire and a new future. The palace felt different. After the trial, Jake had been accepted. The nobles gave slow nods when he walked past. The guards no longer looked at him with hate. The people of Velyar started whispering new things. He passed the trial. Maybe he really loves her. Maybe he is one of us. But even with acceptance, the sky above Velyar was not at peace. Because the king, Zarella's father, was not done. The storm begins. Jake and Zarella stood on the palace balcony, watching the clouds. They weren't normal clouds. Dark, heavy shades swirled above the royal towers. Ships, warships, lined the skies. The king had called his secret army from the northern moons. He's going to attack the rebel cities, Zarella said. He wants to burn everything before change can happen. Then we have to stop him, Jake replied. Zarella looked at him. He's my father. Jake nodded. And you're the only one who can reach him. Zarella took a deep breath. Then I will try. But if he won't listen. Jake finished the sentence, voice steady. Then we'll make sure he can't hurt anyone else. One final meeting. Zarella stood in the great hall of the palace, her crown on her head, not as a daughter, but as a future queen. The king walked in slowly. Behind him, royal soldiers stood tall. You've come to beg, he asked. No, Zarella said. I've come to end this. Her voice was clear, strong, full of pain and purpose. You wanted power, she said. So you used me. You set a trap. You broke ancient law to start a war. Vardros didn't deny it. Peace made our people soft, he said. We needed a spark. The Horn Law was the perfect weapon. Zarella stepped closer. You used me like a tool, and you almost killed someone I love. The king's eyes narrowed. You choose him over your blood. Zarella nodded. I choose what's right. Then you're no longer my daughter. Zarella held her chin high. Then you're no longer my king. Vardros raised his hand. Guards, arrest her. But none of them moved. One by one, the soldiers stepped back, because Jake had entered the hall, with the people behind him. Navi, the nobles who believed, the rebels, servants, warriors, even children. They filled the hall, silent but united. And for the first time in his life, King Vardros stood alone. The battle begins, but a king like Vardros does not surrender. He escaped through hidden tunnels and activated the Sky Fleet. Burn the rebel cities, he told the generals. Crush their hope. Jake and Zarella raced to stop him. They climbed aboard an old royal cruiser, one Zarella used as a child, and took to the skies. Around them, warships clashed. Bright beams flashed through the clouds. The sky shook. We have to reach the command ship, Jake said. It's the only way to shut them all down. I can do it, Zarella said. But I'll need time. I'll get you there, Jake replied. The final confrontation. They reached the command ship. The hallway was full of smoke and alarms. The king waited at the center, wearing full war armor, his crown shining like fire. "I warned you," he said. "Love makes you weak." "No," Zarella said. "It made me strong." The king raised his hand. Energy burst from his palm, straight at Jake. But Zarella jumped in front. She screamed as the blast hit her chest, knocking her back. "No," Jake roared. He rushed forward, rage and fear crashing inside him. He grabbed the fallen sword beside him, Zarella's sword, and with one clean move, he pointed it at the king's throat. "Stop this," Jake said, "before you lose everything." The king looked into Jake's eyes, and for the first time, he saw something he never expected. Mercy. He dropped to his knees. Aftermath. Zarella survived. Barely. Jake carried her back to the cruiser, holding her hand, whispering stories about Earth, pizza, and marshmallows. She smiled weakly. "You're still talking about sugar." "Always," Jake whispered. "You can't die. Not until you try one." She squeezed his hand. A new dawn. A week later, the warships left the sky. The king was taken into exile. Zarella was crowned queen, this time by choice, not tradition. And standing beside her, hand in hand, was Jake. Not just a human from Earth anymore. Not just a husband by law. But a partner. A warrior. A prince. The coronation. The whole planet watched. Zarella stood on the high steps of the royal tower, wearing silver robes. Jake stood beside her, dressed in simple black. "We start again," she said, her voice strong. Not with fear, not with rules forced on others, but with truth and love. Cheers rose across the land. Jake smiled and leaned in. "You still want to try that marshmallow?" Zarella laughed. "Yes, but only if you make it." Epilogue. The Garden of Stars. Months passed. Peace returned to Velyar. The gardens bloomed brighter. The people smiled more. And Jake and Zarella walked through it all together, hand in hand. "Do you still think touching my horn was a mistake?" she asked one night. Jake laughed. "No, it was the best accident of my life." And under the twin moons, they kissed again, not because of law, not because of fate, but because of love.